Let's talk about leadership. Why do some coaches raise from the ranks to the head coach or GM and consistently fail to excel? It's all about leadership. Tom here has been a leader across the globe, and his book, C-Suite and Beyond, captures the 4 keys aspects of leadership. And in this episode, we're going to discuss how leadership has affected his beloved team, the New York Football Giants. So here we go. Local football flavor, meet the Giants and how leadership matters. Welcome to Local Football Flavor, where we talk to local fans to get the real information of what's going on with their team. So, Tom, it's obviously a very critical role to any entity, any organization of how are you run. And, we've seen across the league, obviously across companies, how a couple of key figures can implode something, looking at Jacksonville last year in the case of Urban Meyer, or how a new group can take over and excel. And that's exactly what the story of the Giants are. I mean, you're coming off your bye week. You're 2-6 for the last, I believe.
No. We're 6-2. We're not. Hang on a second.
For the last 7 years, you guys are tied with Jacksonville for the least amount of wins. So you look at this, and it's been a really bad trough of leaderships that were subpar. Taking a guy in Joe Judge who wasn't qualified. I mean, there's no other way to say that. And giving him enough rope to not just hang himself, but hang a franchise kind of got embarrassing. So why don't we start with this, Tom, about how to avoid this? Because this is going to be one of these topics that obviously is applicable to the Giants, but it's one of these things that's going to be able to transcend football a little bit.
Well, first, let me just say that, the NFL is great because it puts into the spotlight of actually what happens in businesses every day. I mean, you see, I was an expat for many years. I worked all over the world and ran subsidiaries for large, conglomerates. And as an expat, you went into a general manager or CEO role, you had a 3-year window. And within a 3-year window, it was typically you either turned the ship and got things fixed or you were fired. And if you turned the ship and things got fixed, they want you to go on and do something bigger and better. And the NFL is such a great example that we can see because nobody kind of watches businesses. The businesses are boring, but everybody loves the NFL. Mm-hmm. So we watch the NFL, and it's very typical what happens where you take a new team, management team, leadership team, you put them inside of an organization, and they have about a 2-3 year window to turn it. And if they don't, they get fired, right? And that's pretty much how businesses work every day. They have different key performance indicators, different measures, but people either succeed and turn businesses around, or they get fired and they get the next group of individuals to try to do it. And Giants are a great example of that, where they had some great leadership over the years, both in head coaching and in general management. And usually general managers were astute enough to actually pick great head coaches that turned the teams around, and less, I would say weaker general managers, and Giants certainly had their share of them. They didn't do such a great job, and they didn't think it through, and they brought the wrong people in, and they weren't able to turn it. So far so good this year.
Yeah, and looking at this dynamic of how to structure your business house, every team does it a little bit differently. So I obviously hear them in Pittsburgh, and we have had essentially. They had divided the team into 2 separate parts. There is the in-season part where Tomlin is in charge and Colbert doesn't step in front of a microphone at all, and he is gone. And then there is from the end of the Steelers' last game, Tomlin does his end press conference the following Tuesday. And with the exception of people interviewing him because he's at the combine and he kind of has to, you don't hear from him. It's all Kevin Colbert. It's or in this case now it's Con, but it's completely separated. We have player personnel acquisition, we have player personnel development, and these are 2 separate camps. And that's obviously not the way it is in every team. There are some organizations where the GM essentially is in charge of everything, and sometimes it fails abysmally. Think back to Bob's favorite team in Detroit, how Millen would just destroy that thing. He had destroyed Mariucci rather. And the Giants certainly have had, like I said, their ups and their downs. So I have a two-part question for you.
More downs than ups, let's say that.
Fair enough.
But hey, guys, just, with all due respect, in my lifetime, I'm not a young guy, I'm in my 60s, but in my lifetime, I got to see him win 4 Super Bowls, 2 under Parcells and 2 under Coaghlin. So,
yeah,
we had our ups and downs, but not many teams can say they got 4 Super Bowl rings in my lifetime.
No, not at all. I mean, there's only 5 teams that have 4 or more, period. Yeah. So it's certainly an accomplishment. So where I was trying to get with that is, my question is, in the Steelers case, the reason they can have 2 equal parts is because they have an active owner who is capable of being in charge above them and is universally unquestioned. In other entities, you don't have that. You have essentially vacant ownership, hoping that the underlings will take care of the operation. And obviously in business, that is incredibly common. So my question for you is, starting from the leadership business perspective, what would you prefer the ideal layout to be? And then in the Giants case, when it worked, what was the layout, and what wasn't it when it didn't work?
Well, look, the Maras have always been very much involved, and even today, the Maras are involved. He does hold press conferences. I mean, he doesn't step on toes, but he does engage with the fan community, and he does have whether it's Tish or Mara, they're not hands-on owners, but they are involved. They're not totally in the background where you don't see them and you don't hear of them at all. Look, dedication to one individual where you put all that onus on them and they make all the decisions in a silo is never good. I mean, any leader that doesn't build a great team, and whether that may be a football team where the players are playing, or whether it's the leadership team, including our coaches and scouts and everything else. I mean, it's a collaborative effort, and any great leader will surround themselves with people who are experts at their each individual task. So an owner, there's nothing wrong with an owner being involved with the team. I don't think they should be a dictator and mandator. I mean, George Steinbrenner from the Yankees comes to mind. He was a pretty much of a tyrant individual, but you get involved and you pick the right people, and then hopefully those people that you pick, put a team together, and they're not dictators, but they are individuals who put a balanced team together. And what do I mean by a balanced team? Great leaders understand the diversity of thinking, and I call it diversity of thought. We have a lot of diversity in the United States today. We talk about diversity. We talk about gender diversity. We talk about race diversity. We got all, income diversity. There's all kinds of diversity, but I always call it diversity of thought. And a good, healthy, balanced team has a diversity of thought, because with the same problem, if you have the same mindset, you may come up with one solution. But with the same problem, you have diversity of thought and different ways of solving that problem. And there's all kinds of assessments and tests and, personality assessments and things to say, okay, how does one individual go about problem solving, et cetera, which is different from another person. And if you can get them in the same room and appreciate each other's gifts, for that same problem, you come up with 5 or 6 different solutions. So it's much easier to pick the right solution when you have 5 or 6 choices than when you have the same thinkers in the same room and they all say, hey, that's the one solution. That's the one we got to go with, because nobody else can come up with a different solution because they all have the same blind spots and they all think alike. So great leaders understand putting a diverse thinking team together, where people view the same problem, different solutions, and you're just much ahead of the game.
And Tom, I have an additional question to that point. I really like the thought of the diversity of thought. And when we think about how it applies to the New York Giants, you said you've been watching the Giants for a long time. You've been, just as a fan for many, many years. As you've looked at the history of the Giants, where have you seen that diversity of thought shine through? Like in the timeline of the Giants, what period of time did you see that the most, and what happened as a result of that on the football field?
Well, look, I'll take the two coaches. They were head coaches and general managers for the 4 Super Bowls, right? You take Bill Parcells. Many argue that in fact it wasn't Bill Parcells that won those Super Bowls, but it was Belichick, who was the defensive coordinator at the time, right? Because both of those teams won the Super Bowls on defense, not on offense, right? Although you got to say Phil Simms had a pretty good game that Super Bowl in LA. I mean, I remember I was a Giants fan. I was following him, and there was a bar I was watching the game, and they had these gadgets, devices where you can kind of up to the snap, you can call the play, and you were getting points. I forget what the name of the thing was, but like the first 4 or 5 plays, I was like, run right, one left, run up the middle. And they came out, and Phil Simms was throwing play action bombs and everything else. Was like, who's this team? So it was, but again, it was Bill Parcells who wasn't afraid to surround himself with, really talented coaching staff and individuals, and delegate to them. And the same thing was with Coaghlin. Coaghlin had a number of assistant coaches, whether it was an off or defense, and that's where anytime a coach comes in and they say, well, it's a head coach, like Brian came into New York, and will he relinquish the offensive play calling, right? So to me, it's like a huge yellow flag. If you're a head coach coming in and you're not relinquishing the play calling to your offensive coordinator, that means you really don't have a lot of faith and trust in your offensive coordinator. You're not willing to delegate him. You're not willing to trust him. So why even have that person there? So I think, when he talks about, when you're asking me, Bob, about that diverse team, well, you bring in a diverse team. You make sure everybody's got the same vision, everybody's got the same culture. And we'll talk a little bit about culture and vision, but everybody's kind of on that same page, and they understand how they contribute that, and then you trust them and you delegate to them. And Parcells and Coaghlin was able, they were able to do that. If you look at, some of the other coaches, Pat Schumer, yeah, not so much. Ben McAdoo, not so much. Ben McAdoo was an offensive coordinator, and then he became head coach, and then he kept, calling the plays. And he wasn't about building culture. He wasn't about surrounding himself with greatness. He was about calling plays and remaining an offensive coordinator as a head coach, right? So those are kind of very, very different mindsets. And I think the great ones are the ones that surround themselves with talent and are not afraid to delegate.
Yeah, you see that as so contrary to the league right now. Like, people expect their coaches to call the plays. We see some coaches where it worked really well. Sean Payton coming to mind. Obviously, in Kansas City, Reed calls his own plays. And for years, we had a great defense. Tomlin was calling it. And there's a way to do both. But I get what you're saying as far as stepping in with no pedigree and then just expecting everyone around you to basically be on the bus or get out is how you create that silo in which you initially said that kills outside thought. Because to that point of having diverse thoughts around you is important, but if you don't have essentially humility to listen and be willing to listen to an idea that isn't yours and implement it, it's kind of useless. And eventually those people with different thought processes, they mentally check out, if not physically. And the thoughts and ideas just stop coming. Because why should I put energy into coming up with a good idea if it's never going to be used? Eventually you stop doing it, and you never maybe physically acknowledge it, but your mind starts looking for another venue. And that's the way that the human beings are. And it's remarkable to me about how little that's understood whenever we talk about people being put in the front offices and coaching staffs. Maybe because it's football and everyone's all macho, I need to be an A-type controller, but it's so counterintuitive. It doesn't work in any other profession. Why would it work in this one? So, Tom, obviously you've dealt with a lot of industries. If you got an answer to that.
Yeah, I got a question to add on to that too, Tom, is that when we think about the organization and when we think about, leadership and product on the field, like, it seems to me like there's like a multi-tiered thing happening in the NFL today where sometimes, when there's dysfunction or in the organization somewhere, usually that's going to come out on the product on the field in some capacity. But there are some points in time where dysfunctional organizations might get their act together and the players are super talented enough and they will potentially win like 9 games in a season and backdoor their way into the playoffs. So to build off of Joe's question, in your mind, do you feel like in most NFL teams, at least throughout the years that you've been watching, do you think a shift has happened where the coach is that main person that's going to be the galvanizing force, or is it that ownership that's going to take control and be the leadership? Like, where do you see that as existing in today's NFL versus maybe a couple years ago or 10 years ago?
Well, that's a fairly complex question. Let me see if I can unravel it. So whether leadership of ownership or leadership of management is the question. Which
yeah, because and the reason I say this is I look back at the Lions and I look at the Steelers and I look at the Saints and I like organizations, and that I'm prone to looking at organizations that have had failures, I guess, in the lifespan of that. But when I look at the Lions, sometimes what I see is like, okay, sometimes they've had good coaches and the good coaches have put a better product on the field, but the management or that the leadership is still awful and terrible. And when I look at like the Saints and I see that like, Mike Dick was like, we need to go get Ricky Williams and we're giving up our whole draft for Ricky Williams. Like, that is insane to me to do that. And so is there a point in time, I guess what I'm trying to get at, where, that coach can be like, hey, because the coach that was actually really good in Detroit got canned and got sent somewhere else, and he's still pretty decent. But I just question it sometimes, whether what affects the product on the field more, and can some of those things overcome? What will overcome the other one in an organization, I guess?
Well, let me try to kind of give it a simple, approach to say, look, if the owners don't hire and put the right management or leadership team together and don't trust them and constantly try to micromanage them, then that's not going to end well. So I think it always starts at the top of the pyramid, and we'll talk about what that means. But it really starts with the owners, for the owners to be able to hire the right individual, to trust and delegate to that right individual. Then in that turn, the general manager will hire the right coach, head coach will hire the right offensive, defensive coordinator, etc. And it boils down to the players, right? And I think probably one of the biggest problems with today's NFL versus, a number of years ago is that I remember probably about 2000, I guess it was about 2006 or 2007. I had a good friend whose son was the son of Fred the Hammer Williamson. Right? I don't know if you may not be old enough, but he used to be in the Oakland Raiders. He was one of the best defensive backs, and he wanted to have a Hollywood career. So when they had a party, a number of older NFL guys came and supported him. And the fact is, players in the NFL in the 70s and even early 80s couldn't survive on their NFL salary, right? So they were taking summer jobs as, installing construction, sheetrock, selling insurance, whatever, to supplement their NFL income, because they could not sustain a living full year round on their NFL salaries. And now we're to the point where it's so ludicrous that I think, part of the issue is really finding the right coaches, the right head coaches who are making actually less money than the players are, right? And trying to find that balance of discipline and motivation, where the guy is pulling in, $25-30 million a year, and he's saying like, well, I'm just going to do it because I'm a superstar and I'm making $25 million a year. So who are you as a coach telling me I got to, do the extra this and extra that? And I think that's part of where Judge failed. I mean, when he first came into the New York Giants, he kind of said the right things, as opposed to, somebody like a Schumer or somebody like a McAdoo, where the thing against McAdoo was, he had a system, and it didn't matter who the players were. He just had that system, and everybody had to fit the system. Judd came in and said, look, I don't want to know about the system being good or bad. I want to know, what the strength of the players are, and let me devise a system that really accentuates the strengths of those players. And he said the right things about, teaching everything else, but then the execution failed terribly because nobody bought into him. His players didn't believe him, and the whole system kind of fell apart. So, it starts at the top, and if the culture is built right, from ownership down to the general manager, down to the head coach, down to the assistant coaches, it boils all the way down to the players, right? And the players either buy into it, or they just like anybody in a job. I call it, some people have jobs, some people have careers, and some people have callings, right? And many people just show up to a 9-to-5 job. They hate being there. They're just there for a paycheck because they got to make the monthly mortgage. And then some people are a little bit more fortunate because they actually build a career off that job, and they enjoy it. But it's not what their gifts are. And then there's few people that actually get to live their calling. So if you got a player who doesn't look at it a job, but he's looking at his calling is to be on a football stage, and you get him to buy into something, well, then you have beauty. If you have the guy just showing up for his $25 million paycheck, Beckham is a talented player, but I'm reading the news right now, and he's sitting on the sidelines, and I'm going to just cash out whoever is going to give me the biggest signing bonus to play the last 6 games of the year for a playoff contender, and whether that may be Dallas or that may be won't be LA now because he's not interested in LA anymore because LA's got no chance of making to the playoffs. But if I was Schoen, there's some talk about Beckham coming back to the Giants, and if I was Schoen, I wouldn't do it because he's just going to be a cancer in that locker room. Because everybody knows he's not it for his calling. He's just, hey, give me a big paycheck for the 6 games I pay. $1 million of cash. Hell with that. See you. Go somewhere else.
Yeah. No, there's certainly a lot to that. There's no doubt about that. And so, how do you go about motivating those that are there just for the check? Because obviously, some people have a calling, but you have 53 on your active roster and about another 20 or so on your practice squad. How do you get them all going in the same direction, knowing how hard it is to find 75 individuals that this is their calling and they're willing to go all out for it no matter what?
I think with any great organization, it starts with culture, and people talk about that. People talk about that, we're bringing in a new culture. But the ones that are successful at it understand that it's not about words. It's about actually how everyone in the building, and Mara is very much about, making sure that they have the right culture. And he didn't think he got the right people in the past with the past GMs and head coaches to live that culture. But it starts with the culture. And I always tell everybody, look, culture is non-negotiable, right? You can talk about it up front. You can have discussion what our culture should be. And with an organization like the New York Giants, you don't start talking about the culture because you got a history of what that culture should be. So it's really getting the right people in the building to start living that culture. And it's contagious. And people are either on board or they're not. And if they're not on board, if they don't buy into the culture, they have no place in your team. You cut them, right? You get rid of them. And the Giants actually did. They cut a bunch of people that everyone is kind of scratching their head and why did they cut them? Why did they let them loose? But I'm guessing the reason was because they just didn't buy into the culture, no matter how talented they were. So if you can get people, any one of your players, and look, you can be passionate about a culture and a team with a change of leadership. You can catch that DNA, you can catch that fever. Maybe it wasn't there because you didn't buy into the people before, right? But it always starts with culture.
Yeah, it's funny how you say people are more important than the place. It's not about the things that are around you. It's ultimately, are they buying into your actions? And from a personal Steelers note, that's why Claypool's not here anymore. He was disenveiling himself from the culture, and now that he's gone, people are starting to speak freely about that. But that's the truth. And it's amazing about how you see these kinds of players that you look at backup quarterbacks, for example. There are some of them in the league that basically look on paper when you watch them in preseason that have zero talent. Like they can't do anything. How do they even get a D1 scholarship? But there'll be backup quarterbacks for 7 years. I think Colt McCoy is probably the greatest example of that in the league right now. He's still getting a check. You'll never see him again. But what does he do? He shows up to the meeting room. He gives some insight, and he keeps everyone going in the right direction and helps that quarterback that will be on the field process things better. And that gets me to one of the things once we get below the coaching GM sphere to actually people on the field that of where you can see trust. And for me in an offense, you see trust by how quickly does the play call come in. Because if you're trusting your quarterback to go to the line, evaluate things with his own eyes, rather than you essentially micromanaging him through the headset, to me, that's the easiest way of seeing trust. And the team that is, I think, hurting the most from this, at least of the new hires, is the Raiders. Because Carr is obviously a very capable quarterback out there. But now he's coming up to the line slower than he ever has at any point in his life, or at least in the NFL career. And the team has its worst winning percentage under him ever. And I find a direct correlation there. So that's how I look at trust being visible through entities. And did you see tangible changes like that, or maybe a different one that you can see on the football field now that the Joe Judge era is over and the new regime is here to stay?
Well, yeah, Jones has probably the toughest job on the field right now because he doesn't know if he's going to have a job next year or he's not going to have a job. So, he can kind of go up there being like really timid and say, oh, I don't want to make a mistake. But, to your point, as a leader, you have two options. You can hire stupid people and micromanage them, or you can hire smart people and delegate and let them go. Mm-hmm. And I think with quarterback, it's the most that's the most important part of that position is really your mind. It's the least athletic spot on the field. It's the most cerebral spot on the field. And we have a tendency to kind of say, oh, that quarterback, he's so exciting to watch. He's so dynamic, but he can't get past the second or third reads. He can't pick up, who's going to be the blitzing linebacker. And there's many of them who say, oh, they're so exciting to watch, but they're not winning football players because that is the most important position where in split seconds you have to make key critical decisions. You have to be able to span the field. Who's secondary, third option. And a lot of exciting quarterbacks, never get that far and they start running right away. Mm-hmm. So when you have somebody that's in that position, and look, I think Jones, is he a Hall of Famer? Probably not. But is he one of the better quarterbacks that Daboll can make him a better quarterback in the NFL? I think absolutely. Because he's one of those guys who's actually smart. He's learned, he's matured, and he can span the field and make smart choices. And that's what Daboll's telling him. Jones is making smart choices, and he's giving him that confidence to make those smart choices. And I guess that confidence also breeds itself because Jones now feels more comfortable and says, okay, well, I didn't do something stupid today. What did I learn? And then next week he goes out there and go, oh man, I didn't do something stupid again today. And we won a game. And what did I learn from that? So he's starting to, mature, put that together and make the right decisions. But that only came because, like you said, he was trusted with those decisions and he learned from those decisions. If he was micromanaged, he would never learn because he's not making decisions. Everybody just kind of says, do this, do this, do this, do this. And he doesn't learn from it.
Yeah, and to that point, Tom, I was really curious when you said that, Daniel Jones has the hardest job on the field because he doesn't know if he's going to be there next year. from your mindset as a fan and from your background as well, do you think it's in the Giants' best interest to continue to grow and build with Daniel Jones? Because the Daniel Jones we're seeing this year is definitely a more confident Daniel Jones than what we saw last year. And confidence makes a world of difference, even though his wide receivers and his weapons, other than Saquon Barkley, right, are pretty much on the lower tier of what you can get in the NFL at this
Or they have a
moment.
broken orbital socket.
So my question is would they keep Daniel, in your mind, would they keep Daniel Jones and continue to help him grow to be successful, or playing, just another role here, if the Ravens hadn't signed or do not sign, I'm not sure where it's at yet, Lamar Jackson, do you feel like with
he's going to get a franchise if they don't sign him, Bob? He's never become a free agent.
I'm just playing devil's advocate here in a way. Would they be better to go after a more talented, athletically quarterback who is a good decision maker, or could they build a team for the future like they're building now, where this could be successful for many, many more years?
Look, I think basically Schoen has a difficult task for the next 2 years in cleaning up the cap, right? Mm-hmm. So even if they wanted to get Lamar Jackson, they couldn't afford him, right? There's no way they could sign him with today's cap and the restrictions have, and even in 2023, they're not going to have any money to sign a huge superstar. So I don't think that's really a question in Schoen's mind, and it shouldn't be, right? So the question is, okay, if you're looking to draft next year or the following year, do you draft Jones' replacement? You gave up on him. I think what's going to happen is, because, again, of salary restriction, cap restrictions, probably they tag Jones next year, right? They probably can't afford to give him a long-term contract and give Barkley a long-term contract and give Dexter Lawrence a long-term contract. So, there's things that he has to do to manage that cap and figure out how that's going to work. So I think probably Barkley or Jones, but not both, will get a long-term contract at the end of this year. My guess is probably Barkley gets that contract because it's cheaper. Barkley's going to come cheaper than Jones. And then Jones probably gets tagged with a franchise tag. Maybe Dexter Lawrence also gets tagged, and maybe he gets a long-term contract, depending, again, what the cap looks like. I don't think Lamar Jackson's coming to the Giants, and I don't think any big ticket. I mean, I laugh at Cleveland. I mean, I don't know what the hell they were thinking. They mortgaged the house for the 5th time and gave up everything for this guy that wasn't even on the field this year. And even if he gets on the field next year, I have no idea if he's going to be any good. I mean, he hasn't played football in 2 years?
Yeah, when you look at that, when you look at that example, that goes back to what we were saying in the beginning about ownership micromanaging people they should be trusted. It was reported before it was signed that neither the coach or the GM wanted him, but the owner made the trade. That was reported how that went down. And I am rooting for chaos theory of Houston to have the 1st and 2nd pick overall. That is 100% what I'm rooting for. I want that so bad. But I got a lot more questions for you. We're going to do a quick little break, and we'll be with you here on the other side. This episode is sponsored by the podcast Father and Joe. Father and Joe aims to bring individuals into a better relationship with God. Each episode discusses an element of the human experience that we all can relate to, as well as questions about faith. What are indulgences? What's going on with purgatory? Why can I mentally grasp the concept of God, but I don't feel him in my heart? During each episode of Father and Joe, we are invited to enhance our relationships, and in doing so, we will improve ourselves and society. Download Father and Joe every Tuesday. So we thank you for watching this episode of Local Football Flavor. We know there's a lot of different things you can be doing with your time, so we appreciate you either listening or watching us in whatever way you're digesting us here today. So we here at the episode want to try to request helping us out in one of 3 different ways, because all 3 ways will help us. First is the analytics. If you can either click like or subscribe on whatever platform you're watching us on, it makes a tremendous difference as those algorithms kind of control what our popularity will be. And you, our listeners, are the only one that can help us win those analytics games. So by clicking like and subscribe, it makes a tremendous deal for us, and leaving reviews and comments help tremendously as well. So that's what we ask as you as a listener to do. If you're interested in the show, you'd like to be a guest on the program, please reach out to us. We love talking to people, and it's our conversation about your favorite team, letting people know what's really going on that the national media normally misses. So we would love to have those conversations with you. And the third way is the sponsors. As you've noticed, we've already had some sponsors reach out to us here. You can see one down here in the corner. You can easily be in the scroller along the bottom, having your own personal message, as well as all other fun things like controlling the jersey I'm going to wear, or that little teddy bear behind me can be one of your team logos things. You can make me wear a stupid cheese head if that's what you want to do. All of those things are available by reaching out to us at localfootballflavor@gmail.com. We thank you guys very much for being a part of the show. And now let's resume to today's episode. Yeah, so where I wanted to come in and ask this goes along those same lines that we were talking about here with leadership and how to build in the future. So obviously in the NFL, it's one of these situations where, like all of us business owners have, a limited amount of resources. Now, obviously the NFL's number, having a couple M's behind it, is different than what some startup businesses have, but it's still, they have a finite amount of resources in the form of the draft capital and the form of free agency in the salary cap in general. So where I wanted to come with this was, I think that the owner that's most engaged in micromanaging in the day-to-day operations is Jerry Jones. I think that's pretty safe to say he's their GM. He also hasn't won really since Jimmy Johnson's left. I mean, I know that the future coach came in and took over Jimmy's team and still won, but really since there's been a strong person in the room telling him no, Dallas hasn't done anything. I mean, realistically, it's been my life, essentially. And when you look at the branding and how to do this, because this is a very complicated way of getting to say is, from an owner's perspective, you can have the goal of trying to win Super Bowls, or you can have the goal of lining your pockets. That's clearly Brown's goal in Cincinnati. Don't spend any money because I'm going to have a profitable machine. So why should I put any risk out the door? And as we're talking about the limitations the Giants are going to have with their cap coming in next year, this is a general question for strategy in life, and then also specific Giants question. How do you propose that the Giants business should go about dealing with that mindset of going for a win or going for the cash?
Well, in the words of Joe Schoen, who came in and they said, look, can you rebuild and win at the same time? And they said, yeah, I think we can rebuild and win at the same time, and they're on that right path. So I don't think those are mutually exclusive. What you said, winning, having a winning team, or having a winning, profitable business. I think they're. They go hand in hand, because in fact, if you have a winning team, you're going to have a lot more endorsements. You're going to have a lot more commercial. You're going to have a lot more funding coming into your team as a winning team versus a team that's a losing team that nobody wants to watch, and they're kind of the laughing stock of the NFL. So I don't think they're different. And if you're looking at a business, right? A business with a very strong brand, with a very successful brand, is worth a lot more than a business that doesn't really have a strong brand, right? There's, I did a lot of acquisitions and mergers throughout my life, and there's a thing called valuation and goodwill. So you look at the profitability business, which is usually defined as EBITDA, which is earning before interest and amortization, depreciation, and people assign a multiple to that. And sometimes the multiple is 12, sometimes the multiple is 60 or 70. If somebody wanted to buy Amazon, or if somebody wanted to buy Facebook or something, you would be looking at multiples of hundreds. Mm-hmm. Right, versus somebody buying just a regular business, it may be a multiple of 8 to 10. But why is that? because they say they have this value of, which is a good value, which is really the value of the brand, right? And that's where it carry forward. I mean, Warren Buffett said one time, he says, I want to invest in a company that has a strong brand. And the reason is because a strong brand will withstand a stupid person leading that company. And one day, a stupid person will lead it, right? And so that's Warren Buffett, right? So if you build a strong brand, like the New York Giants, that their objective is to win, not to manage the bottom line. Now, they don't always win because they make the wrong choices sometimes, and as we've seen for the last, number of years, last eight or 9 years. But it's always their focus in putting a winning product on the field, and Mara is very clear about that, and he was kind of ashamed about the fact of not having a winning product over on the field for so many years. But that's really his objective: continue to maintain that strong New York Giants brand, and the salary cap is the salary cap. I mean, you can't. That's one of the beauties of the NFL, to kind of balance the equation amongst all the other teams. That if you're in a big market, you can't spend your way to winning, right? So that's why you have the cap in place. So all the markets are equalized. It doesn't matter how big they are. So I don't think it's a if you have a winning team and you have a winning brand, I think by association you're going to have a profitable organization. I think if you're just kind of managing for profits and not willing to cultivate and build your brand, then I think that's just a wrong approach. But sooner or later,
Yeah, Joe, I don't feel like that applies when you're looking for profit. I feel like I know the NFL teams are looking for profit, right?
But certainly applies to baseball. I
feel like that applies to the MLB a lot more than it applies here, because I mean, Pittsburgh, the Pirates at least, they are just a profit. They are not spending any money. We've been on the bottom of the league for a long time. And then you look at the New York Yankees, New York Mets, spending money trying to get to the top of the league or already at the top of the league. And then you look at the Angels, who are spending money and still not turning anything from the talent that they have, which is amazing when you have two generational talents on your team and you still can't do anything with that. But to that point that you're making, Joe, I wanted to ask you too, Tom, is that when it comes to boneheaded decisions and it comes to signings that just don't make sense, either because they're too expensive or the player personnel really doesn't fit, do you feel like this coach with the GM and with the owner, do you feel like that decision-making process for the Giants, and I know it's not going to always be true because you are going to make mistakes along the line, but do you feel like they're now as a team and together, they're not going to go out there and make those boneheaded decisions like signing Kenny Golladay to this huge ballooned contract and him not even doing anything and being hurt? Do you see those signings to be the Giants of the past, or do you feel like something's still in the organization that will allow that to happen?
I think time will tell. I think short term, at least for this year and next year, and probably even 2024, I don't think that's going to be an issue because they don't have enough money to make boneheaded decisions. But look, if Jerry Reese was not one of my favorite general managers, and he kind of blew up 3 or 4 years where he signed I think 3 or 4 huge contracts in 1 year, thinking that they're going to kind of turn the tide in 1 year, and they had a winning season that year, and the following season they kind of just totally fell apart, and it was just irresponsible. And the same thing with Gettleman. Gettleman had a number of things where it wasn't only Galloway, but other contracts that he signed previous to that. Signing Beckham for a freaking huge deal and then cutting him loose. I mean, he just made a lot of panic moves where for some reason, and I would equate it to like a corporation. A corporation says, okay, we gotta make these quarterly earnings, or we got to make these annual earnings. Otherwise, Wall Street will build the crap out of us. So they make some foolish short-term decisions, sacrificing long-term longevity just for that quarterly profit. And it's very similar to what these general managers did. It's like, I'm going to make some foolish decisions that prevent me from doing some really good stuff in the future with a short-term view of maybe this season versus this quarter. And Gettleman did that, and Jerry Reese did that, and I was not a fan of either one of them. So I don't know Joe Schoen. Time will prove he's going to be a good GM or a bad GM. I think, like I said, right now he doesn't have much of a choice, because he can't be a drunken sailor because he's got no money to spend.
Well, on that note of the long term to short term, with the resources you guys do have is the draft. So this is a question that comes around every single draft year. Do you take a guy who could be a potential risk, whether it be off the field personality stuff, potentially injury history? Do you risk that versus going with the more safe bet? So in this last draft, the Steelers, you can say, risked on Pickett because the guy was hurt. He was hurt at Georgia, didn't play really since he was a freshman, but we still took him in the second round. You can also make the argument that it was so far in the receiver pool, he just was up. But where I'm going with this is on the maturity side of guys, does being in New York make it more dangerous than being in a small market like Green Bay in terms of trying to target someone who's a risk caliber type player?
I think yes and no. First of all, I think the whole draft is I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of experts, a lot of thought, a lot of analysis goes into it, but I really can't figure out why somebody gets picked number 12 overall versus number 28 overall. Yeah, you can tell the difference between a first rounder and a sixth rounder, but within that first round, within the first two rounds, I'm always scratching my head why this person got picked and 5 slots ahead of the other one. I think it's a combination of potential as well as need. So everybody says take the best available player. There's always that thought of what do I need and who's the best available player for that need, and who's the best available player I think is also kind of subjective, because you have all kinds of minds in that draft room and pre-evaluation and everything else. But to your point, look, it's a lot easier to get in trouble in a market like New York, right? I take the greatest player of all time in New York, Lawrence Taylor, right? He wouldn't be playing football today. Let's put it that way. I mean, he would have failed consecutive drug tests and it would have been, kicked out of the NFL. Read his lifetime stories. Half the time on Sunday, he kind of walking on the field still high on crack. Great player. Now, would Lawrence Taylor have been a crack addict and a drug addict if he was, maybe in Cincinnati or maybe, in Cleveland or some other market? I don't know. Right. But there's a lot of stuff in New York that probably doesn't catch up to you in other markets. Just the hype, the press, the media. There's also a lot of positives to that, because you can get some great endorsements as a New York Giants player that you wouldn't get as a and I don't want to beat up on Cleveland, but
it's okay.
one of the smaller markets. So there is that element of truth to that you have to be mature enough to be able to handle the New York media and the New York, I would say metropolitan area. So, yeah.
Does the team view that as an extra burden that's placed upon them, or do they use that as an asset to try to obviously in free agency, they can't do that, but do they use it as an asset to say, hey, you come up here and you show up, we might be only able to pay you X, but because you'll be in New York, now you'll be in 3 different commercials that you never would have been exposed to.
Well, I'm sure that's part of the contract negotiation. I mean, if I was negotiating those contracts, I would definitely try to make that point to say, hey, come to New York because You know, you get 100,000 from us, and you get 100,000 from a competing company, but our 100,000 is worth $1 million instead of 100,000 because of all those reasons. So, if I was in a large market, I would certainly use that to my advantage in negotiation. But especially in the draft, I mean, if you're getting drafted, you don't have a choice. You get drafted, you go where you get drafted. So it's really about free agency is what you're talking about. And in free agency, I think, half these guys, the lawyers are negotiating deals anyway. They don't know. The players don't know what the hell they're doing. So,
and in this day and age, Joe, the thing that happens now, I think that point was probably more so maybe 15, 20 years ago. But in this current day and age, when you look at the prevalence of social media and you look at the ability of players to get their names out there, yes, it's going to be easier to get your name out there in New York. But I feel like nowadays that's shifted, where people are going to places, particularly free agents, like we just talked about Odell Beckham, I don't care where the money is. I care where the wins are. I don't care if I'm going for 1 year, 2 years, I don't care if I'm not going to have the opportunity to they still care about it, but they want to win, particularly players who haven't won before. Mm-hmm. Like if you said to me last year, if I was a free agent and I said I could go play with Tom Brady or I can play with Daniel Jones in New York, I don't care if I'm playing in Tampa. I care that I'm playing with a winning franchise or a winning quarterback. So to that point, I feel like, the Giants are in an equally as good a position as they can ever be in this day and age right now, because not only are they at the epicenter of a place where people do want to be and do want to go to and be around, but they also have a winning team at this moment in time that could potentially be playoff contender and beyond for this year and maybe a couple other years. So when you look at that, Tom, when you look at and you think about where you hope the Giants are going to be at in 5 years, and you were to project forward a little bit, thinking with your business cap and your fan cap, what do you feel are the Giants' prospects over the next 5 years? Players, personnel, wins. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a positive outlook, and I'll tell you why. First of all, Joe Schoen walked into a situation, and look, I did this many times myself. I would get a new assignment, and I would go to be the leader of a new company. And the first thing I would look at is the P&L and the balance sheet, and set up all kinds of reserves for next year, right? Because the past year is behind me. That's somebody else's sins, so I really don't care about their sins and living up to it. So I set up all kinds of reserves for the first half of next year to say, look, I got to make these reserves because this is a liability my predecessor set up for me. So I'm not going to be held responsible for those liabilities. And then you have a smooth sailing for the second half of the year because you set up those reserves. And any astute business guy will do that when they walk into a new situation. And that's really what happened with Joe. I mean, he kind of walked in a situation that was past sins. So, now he's in a situation where hopefully he's smart enough not to mortgage the house, even when free cap shows up. Hopefully he'll make some responsible decisions and not do the same mistakes as Gettleman did for short-term success, which actually never kind of materialized. Mm-hmm. So, now that they cleaned up, 2023 is still going to be tough. I think, just in my opinion, and I'm just, it's beyond my pay grade to make, to do these analysis, but I think what will happen is he'll probably sign Barkley to a long-term deal. I don't see any more trades or large spending, this year because he doesn't have the money for it. Mm-hmm. I think next year they'll have a little bit more active in free agency than this year. But again, I don't see any large, huge signings next year. Hopefully, Galloway is going to be off. Off their,
Galladay, yeah.
Galladay, he's gone, and they'll make some savings for him too as well. I think they will continue to build through the draft, next year. I'm guessing they're going to tag Jones, and then maybe in 2020, at the end of, sometime during the course of 2003, towards the end of 2003, they'll sign him to a longer term contract, unless he, really blows up. But look, they made a pretty good player out of Allen. And, when Allen was kind of out of college, everybody said, oh, what's Buffalo doing? And they made a, great results with that guy. So I think they can work, maybe not magic, but I think Jones is going to be, one of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, in 2023. I think he's going to be the best quarterback in the league. I don't think he may be a Hall of Famer, but he's going to be in the top 10. And I think he'll be signed to a long-term contract.
Yeah,
that's just my opinion.
And that's actually not as crazy as people would say off the surface, because Josh Allen and Jones do have some things in common that are pretty important. They both have incredible mental capacity to read things and react. That's one of the most underrated things of Allen. They both are willing to run when they need to. Certainly, Allen has a stronger arm, but Jones has just the capability of being just as accurate as him. Neither one of them have, Allen obviously has a better cast around him with Diggs and Dave Davis, but that's not as far-fetched as some people hearing that going, how can you compare Jones and Allen and saying they're going to be alike? Well, there's actually some very similar building blocks underneath. So,
it's
Tom,
fun
I got
too, Joe. Fun too. Neither of them came from the SEC.
That's true. That they're one of the few in the proud. So, Tom, I have a question for you, just as a pure Giants fan. Looking around the NFL, if there's one team you want to lose, aside from the team that's playing the Giants that day, who is that team that you want to lose?
It's either Dallas or Philadelphia. It's one or the other. If I walk down the street and I see a Philly fan with a jersey on, I want to hit him. Right? That's just joking. But look, in the NFC, it's highly competitive. It's always been highly competitive, and Eagles fans are not big Giants fans, and Giants fans are not big Dallas fans, and so. Okay, I don't want anybody to lose, but hey, if Dallas or Philly loses that week, I'm not so unhappy.
Fair enough. And then the one question I ask everyone before I give you the full screen to let you do your self-promotion is, if there was any one thing, if you had complete power, that you would change either about the NFL or the Giants, what would it be?
The one thing?
Yeah, if there is one thing. And some people have multiple, but if there's one thing that if I could change this today, I would wish it would change.
Look, if I had a magic wand, I would strike a balance for all sports, not just the NFL, but Major League Baseball and everything else. I would strike a balance somewhere between the 1960s and today. I just think it's silly to award 20, 30, 40, $50 million contracts to athletes for playing a sport, right? And not giving you and I and every fan a choice to be able to go to a game because they can't afford to take their families to a game, right? An average person can't take a family to a baseball or a football game anymore, even in the nosebleed seats. At $8 hot dogs and $12 beers and $10 sodas and $200, $250 tickets. This is nonsense. Right. Never mind that I have to, I can't even watch a game on because I got to, either buy DirecTV or whatever to even watch a game on TV. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like this. And some of these players, okay, it wasn't right in the 1960s that they couldn't make a living off NFL either. But it's got to be a balance. And you're not giving the fans a choice, right? You're giving the fans an ultimatum. Right, either walk away and don't watch the sport because you can't afford it, or pay up, and that's just not right.
Fair enough. It also doesn't seem like a good long-term business strategy either when you really break that down. So, Tom, as I said, I want to give you the full screen here. So, if there's anything in which you want to discuss self-promotion, the floor is yours.
I don't toot my own horn. I tell everybody on podcasts because we talked about our calling, right? So if you want to find your calling, answer these 3 questions for yourself. And obviously you got my website there. So anytime you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call 15 minutes and give you a free consultation. But answer these 3 questions for yourself. Number 1 is, who are you? And I'm a servant leader. Number 2 is, what are you passionate about? And I'm passionate about adding values to people, making people better, making products better, making companies better. And number 3, what are you good at? And I'm pretty good at mentoring and leading. Right? So if you want to be a good leader and you want people to follow you, if you don't know who you are, people are not going to follow you because they don't know who you are. Right? If you're not passionate about it, they're not going to follow you, because if you're not passionate about it, why would they get passionate about it? Mm-hmm. And if you're not good at something, that's just competence, and nobody's going to follow you if you're incompetent. So get clarity in those 3 questions, and you'll be in a leadership role in no time. Thanks for having me on.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having it. What a beautiful answer there to end on. So thank you very much. And we'll be with everyone here for the upcoming episodes.